So in Workspace, we have a main toolbar, which is this black ribbon across the top of the screen, and this is always visible when you're in the application. Now, there are a number of icons on here, but not all of them are useful for your everyday user. For a standard user, the key icons to be aware of: first of all, we have this refresh button. Now, when I press this, it refreshes all of the widgets that are on my screen to make sure I'm looking at the most up-to-date data. Now, it's quite an intelligent system anyway. So when I have multiple widgets, if I change data in one of them, and another one like we see here is dependent on that data, the browser is aware that a change has been made and it will refresh all of them for me automatically, which is great. But sometimes you might have other users or system processes that are also affecting the data you can see. And if they're running in the background outside of your browser's awareness, it doesn't know that it needs to update to show you the most up-to-date data. So in that case, you may want to press this refresh icon to make sure that you have everything available to you. And it can also be useful if you have gone away from the PC for a little while and perhaps you've been impacted by a timeout, or again, other people may have changed data. So in that case, it can be useful to press it. But it's not something you should be doing compulsively. You won't need to do it often, but if you want a little bit of peace of mind, it can be useful to press that just to be absolutely certain you are viewing the most up-to-date data. Next to that icon, we have an undo button, and this refers to undoing visualization changes. So if in my view I have decided to keep just a couple of rows instead of a large number of them, I've changed the way it visualizes for me, and I can press this undo button and then it will take me back to where I was previously. And next to that, we then have a redo button, which reverses the last undo that I did. And that can also be useful for undoing and redoing context changes like we see here. But it is just for the visualization. So that makes no impact on the data that you have actually entered into cells. But for that, we do have another icon next to them called the Rollback data entry icon. So what I see there is if I type data into a cell and then I press this, it will undo the last data that I typed. And that also works so if I spread on a cell and it's applying across a number of different cells, again, pressing the rollback option will undo the spreading that I did, so it will reverse all of that. But this is one that you should be using with real caution, because in the first instance you might notice there is no equivalent of the redo button next to it. So once you have rolled back your data entry, there's no way to undo your rollback. So if you want to put the data back in, you will have to type it in again. And also, if I move to another page after changing the data, I can still press that rollback button and it will undo the last data entry I did, even if it was on a different page from what I am currently viewing. So you could end up in a situation where you undo data that you are not currently visualizing. So it's just one to be very careful of and make sure you know exactly what the last data you entered was before you press that button. Moving across the ribbon, in the center of our screen, we see the name for the book that we are in. If we click on that, now if we have multiple books or folders open, we can select any of them and we can flip between them back and forth. And you also always have the home page, the welcome page that you can flip back to from there. And if we move across to the right, we'll have a look at the final icon we're going to go over here, which is the share icon. And the first option within there, so we have two options. The first option is to share a link. Now this is just sharing a URL to your book. And it's worth noting that that's only useful if the person you are sharing it with has access to the application as well. Otherwise they won't be able to use it. But next to that, we have an export option. And this one has a couple of sub options in it. So one of them is for the page size for what you want to export, and the other is whether it's portrait or landscape. Now it does always seem to default to portrait, And in my experience, most workbooks and dashboards that we would create, they're pretty much always going to be landscape. So you probably want to swap that over before you press export. Now, what this does, it goes through and it essentially takes a print screen of all of the pages and it puts them out to a PDF format. So it can be good for sharing the whole book with someone who doesn't have access to the application. But what's worth focusing on is that it is just essentially doing print screens. So if it's a reporting book that has been defined to work in a way that everything is completely visible on the screen, that can be great. But if it's a planning book, chances are you have some cube views in here that have their own little scroll bar on them because they have a large number of rows. In those cases, because we're doing a print screen, it's not going to capture the rows that are outside of the scroll bar's visibility. So it's not the best way to share planning data. But if you refer to one of our other videos, the one that is about the context toolbar, that also has a way of exporting data within an individual view, and you can export it to an Excel file, and that's probably more useful for specifically sharing data, whereas this sharing export option that uses PDFs, that is more for sort of sharing a reporting book, so a KPI, dashboard, board pack sort of book.